So here's the thing. This morning I was listening to a podcast, and of course on any morning, all mornings, this morning they were talking about how hard it is to do a solo radio show. Of course they were. What else would they be talking about right before I was going to start my first solo radio show ever? But hey, the world has a funny way of working like that, and this morning I couldn't find my glasses. For the first time pretty much ever. Like, it took me a while to find my glasses, you know? So that's where I'm at this morning. I hope you're doing a little bit better than I am. I'm just a little nervous. I will be honest with you, but this is the Jmull Show. Welcome to the Jmull Show. If you're watching at twitch.tv/the Jmull Show or on our website at 110sportsmedia.com/live. Thank you so much for being a part of this show, and thank you for letting me be a small part of your day. Let me set the agenda for us this afternoon. We've got a lot to get to in the next hour or so. Originally, about 12 hours ago, I was going to start with what COVID-19 means for the sports leagues in this country, and specifically the increased rate of cases, specifically in the places where sports are happening or where sports are going to happen in the case of the NBA. But we're going to open up with something a little different after the events of last night, but we'll get to that in just a moment. After the first segment, our very own platinum recording artist, Chris Brown, will be joining the show to talk baseball and to talk about the absolute mess that is the relationship between the players and the league office, Rob Manfred not being able to get anything together to save his life. And so we're going to talk about that, break that down a little bit. You're going to love his cadence, and you're going to love what he has to say, so I'm excited to talk to him in about 20 minutes or so. And then we'll get out of here with, for your information, just some things that I think that you should know in the sports world, in the world in general. It just so happens today they're all sports-related things, but that'll happen at the end of every show, and we'll get that rolling today as well. But it's going to be fun. We've got a lot to get to. But the first thing I want to start with is, first of all, did anyone watch the ESPYs last night? The ESPYs were awesome last night. And, of course, in the current times of a global pandemic, the ESPYs couldn't be what they usually are. This epic grand production that happens on a stage, and it reminds you of the Grammys and some of the more watched award shows in the country every year. So it couldn't be like that. And everyone knew it wasn't going to be like that. But it was beautiful. I thought it was fantastic. It was powerful. Props to the people who put it together. I mean, it didn't give off the same energy as the ESPYs, quite the same energy as the ESPYs, because in most years, because of course it couldn't. But what it did do was make an impact. It was powerful, and it was very clear. A company in ESPN that typically tries to stray away from politics and has had told people to not talk about politics on shows before, and to not talk about social justice, and to try to keep things as sports as possible. There have been talk about that with ESPN for years now, and that show was clearly taking a stance on where we are in our country right now, and the fight that everyone needs to be a part of for equality in this country, police brutality, and the things that have been sort of coursing the country over the last couple weeks. And then you had Nelson Cruz, who's doing incredible work down in the Dominican Republic, his hometown, and providing not only resources for sports and things, but also resources like ambulances and motorcycles for police, so that they can get to places faster, and so that nobody like his it was either his brother or just a close friend of his who had lost his house simply because they didn't have a fire truck. But they have a fire truck, they have an ambulance, they have all of these things, and that's super awesome to see. But then, so it was a symbol of the momentum around the social movement in this country right now, and shows just how different it is this time around in the fact that it's every race from all corners of the country. But then you had a very stark contrast with how far we still have to go, because last night Bubba Wallace, a black NASCAR driver, found a noose in his car stall at Talladega, which is just absolutely horrible and disturbing and horrifying, and shows just how far we have to get in this country before we can be satisfied with anything. There's still so much room for improvement, and this is, it's a perfect showing of why this can't just move on like it has in the past, that this has to be brought up every single day and has to be on the forefront of everybody's minds for the weeks, for the months, for the years to come. And I think it's a little different right now because it was players in the NBA, they were wearing T-shirts, and now they're talking about what it means and whether or not it's worth to play a season to stand up and make sure that they're doing the most for social justice in this country that they can, and if playing an NBA season is important enough, or if an NBA season is the best way to use their stage to impact that in the biggest way possible. But the ESPYs were beautiful. They really were, and they were incredibly moving. And even though it was all virtual, like we all expected it to be, I thought it did what I thought it would do, and I applaud the people who produced it, who put that together. But then, of course, like I said, you had what happened in NASCAR last night, and that just can't happen. So we have to continue every day to start. We have to continue every day to fight for the equality of everybody in this country, and to make sure that kind of thing never happens again. I wanted to start with that for a very simple reason. That's to set a precedent that we're going to talk on this show about things that need to be talked about. At the foundation of this, it is 100% a sports show, and I'm not trying to hide that. That's the main point of this show is not to be a political show, not to be a social commentary show. But with that being said, there are things that absolutely have to be talked about, and there are things that don't, that intersect when it comes to sports and the rest of the world. And most of the time, sports intersects with the rest of the world and the rest of the issues in the world more times than not. That's the case. So if that's the case, then that's what we're going to talk about when it needs to be talked about. So just to set that precedent, if you're around, thank you so much for being here. If you are making this show a part of your day today on the 110sportsmedia.com launch day, I very much appreciate it. But I wanted to start there and to set that precedent with everyone on the show moving forward. But now let's move to what I originally wanted to start with today, and that's what the increase in cases across the country means for sports leagues in this country. And of course, I'm talking about COVID-19 cases in Florida, Arizona, these places Texas, these places that opened up sooner rather than earlier than most did, and now are seeing an incredible increase in cases and a spike in sort of the fight against COVID-19. And the first thing I would say is this: it makes perfect sense. I mean, I think people almost forgot that there was no cure for this. Does that make sense? They almost forgot that there was no cure for this. Like, it makes sense that, and it's one of those things, it's hard because things were from hospitals weren't getting overrun, and things, cases were not really going down, but they plateaued some, and it seemed like, at least for the time being, it was controllable, and that medical resources weren't being overrun. But at the end of the day, this is still a disease that we don't have a cure for. And so when we go back to living the way that most people want to live, and we go back to our jobs, and we go back to restaurants, and we go back to just being in public and being around people, this is going to happen, right? I mean, it makes perfect sense that this is going to happen. Unfortunately, what that means is that there are going to be more cases, and what that means is that every league and its leadership is going to have to come to terms with the fact that if they restart, people are going to test positive for COVID-19, and people are going to get sick. Justice Winslow came out, Memphis Grizzlies forward, came out a couple of days ago and said, I don't really think that the NBPA, the Players Association, or the NBA care if we get COVID-19, and I don't think that's true, first of all. But what I do think is if the season is going to be played, the priority absolutely has to be the games, because if the number one priority was safety, then these things wouldn't be played. And I think that's the reality of the situation that everybody's going to have to come to terms with, is that if people come to all together to play games and they sweat on each other and they're around, people in these hotels that aren't getting tested by the NBA, that the guidelines for them getting tested isn't nearly as strict as the guidelines for the NBA players and the people actually employed by the NBA and its teams is, then this is going to happen. And while, the most that any of these leagues can do is put in place measures to make sure that it doesn't spread and to make sure that as few people get sick as possible. But, this is going to happen, and we're just going to have to come to terms with the fact that if these leagues want to actually finish their seasons and play their seasons, that they're just going to have to move past and contain and help keep people who get sick as comfortable as possible and prevent the spread of it across their leagues, so that it doesn't turn into an outbreak. Because if the goal was to keep players and the people in the league as safe as possible, it wouldn't be played. That's just the reality of the situation. It's indisputable, because if that was the number one priority, things wouldn't be played. And I say that completely understanding that leagues want to play their seasons. I mean, baseball needs to play their season. We'll get to that with Chris Brown here in just a little while, but baseball needs to play their season, and there's a lot of money to be lost in the NBA if they don't play their seasons, and there's a lot of money to be lost for not only college football programs, but the rest of the sports programs at those schools who depend on the revenue that football generates to run their programs. You're going to see, if college football doesn't happen, you're going to see a lot of sports around this country that don't, for lack of a better term, pay the bills at a university. You're going to see them go away, because those are the first things to go when a university is losing money. And these schools that make an obscene amount of money on football depend on, and we can have a conversation if that's cool, or if it's that's right at a different time. But the reality of the situation is that these schools depend on their football programs for money. So if it doesn't happen, I mean, other parts of the school are going to take big hits, and the NBA is going to take a big hit, and baseball is going to take a big hit, and the NFL is going to take a big hit, and the PGA Tour, and so on and so forth. So I get it. Having said that, I get it. But if we want games, if we want sports, we're going to have to be okay with people getting sick for it to actually happen. I mean, we've already seen, every single sports league has already seen cases. And the NBA has had their cases isolated from team to team, because none of them are together. But we're going to start seeing more in the NBA starting today, as teams start to, the Toronto Raptors are flying to Florida today. They're going to practice at Florida Gulf Coast until they move up to Orlando for the resumption of the NBA season. And the rest of the NBA is supposed to be in their home markets by today. So we're going to start seeing more cases in the NBA, because I guarantee you that once they start testing, things are going to come out. Oh, the Celtics, they've got two guys who tested positive for COVID-19, or across the country, the Suns. Talk about Arizona, Phoenix Suns. They've got a couple guys who have tested positive for COVID-19. Memphis Grizzlies, wherever you want to go with it, it's going to happen. And the PGA Tour had their first positive case over the weekend. Nick Watney testing positive for COVID-19. And then you get to Major League Baseball, who's had camps shut down. Astros, Phillies, Blue Jays. All of these camps have already been shut down at one point or another. And it's made the NBA consider the bubble as a reopen action, because for a long time it was, we're going to play at home ballparks and sort of in regions. So in your division only, or at least to decrease the amount of travel and how far you're traveling. But but they've already seen it, and that hasn't even started. And then you've got college football teams who are having outbreaks. So there are what 100 players on a Division I football team, something like that. LSU already has 30 players quarantined, and I guarantee you more are coming. 21 more Clemson players tested positive. I mean, they're tackling each other in practice, so they're all over each other. So even in practice, I mean, I get you get to games in the NBA and there's just nothing you can do about it. They're going to sweat all over each other. But in practice, you can still have really good practice without anybody getting all that close to each other. And in football, that can't happen. And then, after they're done tackling and sweating and spitting all over each other, then they go live in dorms together. And, at least the NBA players are going to have their own hotel rooms in Orlando, but these college kids playing football are not all getting their own room. That's just not the reality of the situation. So it's impossible to stop that spread. They're sharing bathrooms. They're sharing rooms. Like I said, things are getting, clothes and other items are getting mixed up. And so there's just nothing you can do about that. So, I was reading a USA Today article that 34 college football programs have already reported cases, including all the big names. I mentioned Clemson and LSU, Alabama, Arkansas, everybody, Texas. And Texas was sort of the first big one in this issue to actually, have this outbreak. And so we're getting closer and closer to the question, does this make sense? Is it worth the risk? Because there are things that just are gonna, and even when, like, if colleges actually make it back to campus, not just college football teams, but colleges, and these college football players are going to parties, and then they're going to class with the other people on campus, and they're eating in the same dining halls as others, and walking through the halls, and one person, 2 or 3 people walk through the hall that day that have COVID-19, breathing all over the place and, touching door handles. And then it's really hard to stop that spread too. So we're going to have to get to the point. We're going to have to ask the question eventually, does this make sense? And I think it's coming quicker than we might want it to, which is scary for sports leagues and people. Me, I'd love to have the NBA back. I'd love to have college football and college basketball come back. But at some point, you have to ask the question: Is it worth actually asking? Is it worth actually doing? Is the net positive worth the negatives that absolutely come with it? So we'll see. I'm still not sold. I mean, we're still over a month away from the start of the NBA season. Of course, we're even farther from any kind of football. And Major League Baseball seems like it'll never actually happen. But we'll see. We'll see, that's for sure. But at the end of the day, and this is the biggest point I want to get across, is that at the end of the day, players, front offices, teams, leagues, fans, everybody's going to have to come to terms with the fact that returning to play means that people are going to get sick, and we're just going to have to try really hard to keep that from spreading and there being outbreaks in all of these leagues. But coming up next on the Jmull Show, our very own Chris Brown from 110 Sports, he's going to come and talk baseball with me for a little while. He's great. You're going to love him. You're going to love what he has to say about Major League Baseball, get everyone caught up and talk about the stalemate between the players and the league. And you're going to love his cadence, too. He's got a great voice. But that's coming up next on the Jmull Show. You're watching the Jmull Show on 110sportsmedia.com. All right, we're back on the Jmull Show. Thank you so much for making it a part of your day. Right now, joining us is our very own Chris Brown from 110sports.com. You're going to love what he has to say about baseball. He covers Major League Baseball and a couple of other things for us. But we have to break down what is going on in Major League Baseball. Chris, how you doing?
Doing well, Josh. Doing well. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I love the familiarity of getting somebody that I talk to on a regular basis on the first show. I figured that wasn't the worst of ideas. So I very much appreciate you taking the time to chat some baseball for a little while. But I want to start with a very simple question. If I gave you $100 to bet on Major League Baseball season happening or not, where are you putting your money? Are Rob Manfred and the players going to be able to come to a conclusion about what to do, or are we not seeing baseball in the calendar year?
Well, it's tricky because every time over the past couple of weeks that people have thought we've been making progress towards a deal, it seemed close. It's been sort of one step forward, one step back, two steps forward, and even then there's one step back. Mm-hmm. Right now, I feel like given the situation that there will be some sort of an agreement, there will be some sort of a schedule that is reached sometime in the next week or so for a season. Of course, as you mentioned, Josh, not that long ago, the whole situation with COVID-19 could prove to be another major hurdle in addition to the situation that's going on in terms of length of the season and player pay, rather. That's also going to be a situation that could creep up. I think there will be a schedule reached one way or another. The question, of course, being, is it going to be an agreement between the owners and the Players Association, or is it going to be a mandate from the commissioner, Rob Manfred, which right now it appears to be trending that direction, though the last time it looked like it was trending that direction, they went back to the drawing board again. So I think there'll be some sort of a schedule reached, but whether or not it's the schedule that the players are happy with, or at least in agreement, or if it's just sort of forced by the commissioner is going to be the big question, I think, of the next week.
Right. So you would think that Major League Baseball is one of the easier sports to figure out how to make this happen, just because the nature of the sport is non-contact. Now, of course, there's some there's going to be contact in every sport a little bit, whether it's collisions at home plate or tagging guys out, but in terms of the hierarchy of the easiest sports to come back and play during a pandemic, maybe following golf and tennis, baseball would be pretty high on that list. So my question is, whose fault is it that this is taking so long to figure out? Is it all Rob Manfred? Is there a little bit of blame to put on the players? Why in your opinion has this taken so long to figure out, and it's still up in the air if it'll actually happen?
I think the big thing for me is that the key word here is mistrust. Mm-hmm. There's a mistrust between the owners and the players about everybody being sort of on the same side. I mean, and we've obviously seen Manfred's gotten a lot of flack for what happened when he said, there'll 100% be a season, and then he said, and then the players kind of, what many people describe as called the owner's bluff. Mm-hmm. And said, okay, tell us when and where. And then Manfred says a few days later, I'm not so sure that there'll be a season. And obviously he got a lot of flack for that. But it's a complicated situation. Obviously, the short of it is that for the last couple of weeks, the players have wanted to play as many games as possible, and they wanted a full prorated salary. Meanwhile, the owners have said that because of they're going to lose money because of not having fans in games, the players need to take a pay cut, and that if they want full prorated salaries, it's going to have to be for a shorter season. So looking at it from the outside, you see players wanting to play more baseball and owners wanting to play less as long as it requires paying the players a full amount. People can have reached their own conclusions. I think that more blame does fall on the owners and Rob Manfred. There's this real sense of, I think, out-of-touch nature to the fans and sort of everything that's going on, what's bubbling under the surface for fans. At the same time, I think, it's important to sort of see that there's this real mistrust between the two sides, like I said, where they don't feel like they're acting in each other's best interests. And I think right now we're seeing these two sides so close and still not able to come together. I think that I think that this does fall mostly on ownership and sort of a willingness that they need to make a little bit of a sacrifice to get this going up again.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I was listening to a podcast a couple of days ago with somebody, talking about that no owner should ever buy a sports team to make money off that sports team, because just like a business owner, a mom and pop shop business owner, they don't go into that business with the promise that you're going to make money every single year. Like, and the making ends meet problem of not having money is so much more stressful on the side of on the mom and pop shop owner than the billionaires who own these baseball teams. And so I think I've heard and I've talked to people who say that really rubs players the wrong way too, is that there seems to be a want for money more than a desire to see the sport actually played.
I absolutely think that's exactly, you hit it right on the head there. And the players feel like the owners don't really want to. And it's been reported that there are multiple owners out there who don't want to play Major League Baseball this year because of the cost that it'll take economically, and sort of like you mentioned with the idea of purchasing a Major League Baseball team, owning a Major League Baseball team, for wrong or for right. I mean, this is just the way it is. The fans who support that team feel an ownership of that team. They feel it is their team, and the owners are running. The owners in many cases are running it like a Fortune 500 company, and in their approach. But many fans feel disenfranchised right now because they feel this is their team, and there are, big honcho money men who are, holding it up for the bottom line, and that's sort of just not how sports is supposed to work. Right.
Yeah. How do you feel about the hashtag when and where movement from players? Because, I think there's two sides to it. There's the side of, admirable as the players, sort of come together and become one united front. But then there's the other side of it where you say, okay, but you've gotten 5 or 6 proposals from Major League Baseball and you've shut down all of them. How do you feel about the intention of hashtag when and where, and do the players really mean it, or is it hashtag when and where, but we want it to be the way that we want it?
I think at the end of the day, the players obviously, have an agenda that they want. They want their full prorated salaries, and they want to play as much baseball. And many people say that's the perfect agenda. That's great. I think the one thing that baseball has done, and like you mentioned, they put out multiple proposals over the last couple of weeks. But one thing that's a little bit, I guess, misleading in a general sense about that is those proposals were sort of just different ways of shuffling money around.
Right.
The end result was still not full salaries for the players.
Right.
And so I think that, basically they kind of went back and forth. Baseball was sending proposals that were just sort of shifting things around, and then the players sort of called the owner's bluff and said, okay, fine. Because Manfred has the ability to mandate a schedule. They said, we just want to play. And they called the bluff. They called Manfred's bluff. They called the owner's bluff, and that kind of caught them off guard. That led to Manfred's backtrack. And so I think that the players are, in some ways, many of them just want to play. And at the same time, I think it's also a negotiating tool as well. That got baseball, that got Rob Manfred and MLB Players Association head Tony Clark back to the table to talk about this. So it sort of reopened negotiations, because for the owners, it's a bad look. And for baseball overall, it's a bad look if the schedule is mandated. It's much better if it's an agreement, negotiated agreement. So I think it's a kind of combination of players just wanting to play, but also using what power they have to potentially embarrass the league as well, to sort of force them back to the table.
Gotcha. Is 60 games enough? Now, we've gotten to the point where 70 games would push the regular season into October and the playoffs deep to November, which Major League Baseball has said that they're not going to do. But in the NBA, they're playing 8 games when they come back, and you're going to get to 60, 70, 71-ish games. And that's, in my opinion, that's plenty to actually declare a winner at the end of the playoffs that people will actually take seriously. Will anybody who wins a World Series after a 60-game season be taken seriously, or are we just to the point where they're going to, they might play a season that's 60 games, but that's not really long enough to determine who really deserves to be in the playoffs? Is that enough? Do we know who's the best players in baseball, who the best teams are in baseball after 60 games?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter of what you said, that in the end, 60 games is just such a step back from, baseball. 162 games. It's more than so many sports. It's sort of a game where things, stats, teams, the performance levels off throughout the course of a very long season, and there's 60 game sample sizes throughout the season where crazy things happen. Like if they would have just played the first 60 games of last season, the Nationals would not have made the playoffs. Jack Flaherty, who ended up being one of the top pitchers in baseball, would have been, very underwhelming. An ERA, I think, in the high fours, 50, 60 games into the season before he went on an incredible historic run. So, we see that it's going to be kind of crazy. I think people are we're at the point where no matter how many games they play, whether it's 50, 60, 70, it's not going to be a normal season. And it's sort of important, I think, for people to get into that mindset. It's not going to be typical. There's going to be likely expanded playoffs, likely a universal DH in the NL, and all sorts of craziness. Some players will test positive, like you talked about. Some will be gone for long stints. Some won't play at all because of different health risks. And, things are just going to be so different about the infrastructure of how the league works that I think we kind of have to not expect it to be a slightly adjusted normal, but a sort of embrace the strangeness of it all and just be excited about the fact that there is some baseball to play. But I don't think we can expect it to be, normal.
So the closer the NBA season gets, the more there's talk about, players looking closely and questioning how safe it is. And of course, there's a movement in the NBA to make sure that they make as big of a social impact as they possibly can. But there's definitely some hesitation about coming to Orlando from Major League Baseball players. From NBA players. From what you've heard, from what you've read, do players for the most part want to play? Is there a large contingency of players who are just iffy about that? Where do the players sit on not just the negotiations, but the idea of playing baseball at all? Are they cool with it for the most part, or there's some hesitation like the NBA?
Yeah, from what I've seen, the vast majority of players seem to be on the side of wanting to play. Now, there's obviously the players who are the bigger stars are going to get the more headlines about what they say. The players who are, making major league minimum or barely on 40-man rosters, their voices probably, aren't as elevated with everything they're saying. And there's certainly going to always be some players who are more hesitant than others. But the one thing we have seen over the past couple of weeks is that so much of the attention has just been about money and length of season, and people have sort of just said, okay, the health and safety protocols, there may be some negotiation between the two sides, but that'll be figured out. That won't be a problem. And now we've kind of seen over the last couple of days, in the midst of this over the weekend, like you mentioned earlier in the show, we've seen different teams impacted by COVID-19 cases at their spring training facilities. Major League Baseball has ordered all spring training facilities closed while there are new health protocols determined. And so I think that from reporting over the weekend from The Athletic, from MLB Network, from ESPN, from other sources, sort of painting a picture that now with these cases starting to come up, players are sort of seeking a renewed interest in reviewing the health and safety protocols. And it was reported that earlier that over the weekend, the Players Association would be voting on this new MLB's new 60-game proposal. And then it came out that they might take longer, and now it's going to drag a little bit into this week because the players want to review health and safety measures. And I think that could very well be the next hurdle.
Gotcha.
But I think overall still most players, from what I'm seeing, are still wanting to go out, and that doesn't appear to be a big hurdle just yet.
Who benefits the most from no season at all, or who could use the extra year to rebuild or to get healthy? Which team either benefits the most, or which team is hurt the most by this season never actually being played?
I mean, I think, there are players, certainly the first example that comes to my mind is the Dodgers trading for Mookie Betts on the last year of his contract. If Betts doesn't get to play in a Dodgers uniform, that obviously hurts them significantly.
Right.
And I think it's hard to think exactly in terms of, the thing that kind of comes to my mind, I think of some of the biggest stars in the game who are older, who play a huge role on their team. So, what's another year going to do to a pitcher like Max Scherzer or Justin Verlander? It could be a great thing in that, maybe they have a good amount of time to, sort of build up strength, recover. It's not more innings on their arm. But also you could see guys, if there's a huge layoff and it's another year older for guys in their mid to late 30s, they could be hurting, that could be a blow to those teams, the Astros, the Nationals, and teams like that. Obviously, there are going to be some teams that are sort of up and coming, building up. I think of like the White Sox, for example, with a lot of young talent. But even a team like that, they're young players who are going to have another year to sort of develop. Well, how much development is actually going to happen in that year if they don't play? Because there's not going to be minor leagues. There's not going to be much going on. So I think it's pretty much a loss across the board for players, for teams overall. But you could certainly, obviously in terms of the owners, the ones who don't want to play because they think they're going to lose, that they argue that they're going to lose more money by playing than by sitting pat. And so that's sort of a big portion of why we see what's going on now.
Gotcha. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate you coming and chatting about baseball for a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Josh.
Talk to you soon.
Yep, absolutely.
That's Chris Brown, 110sportsmedia.com, one of our Major League Baseball guy, as well as some other things for us across the site. He'll have a show coming at some point once we have some more information about Major League Baseball. Then we'll see where his show goes as well. But he's great, and follow him on Twitter at @CBrownSports. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about baseball. And then get out of here with some FYI. You're watching the Jmull Show on 110sportsmedia.com. All right, we're back on the Jmull Show. Shouts to Chris one more time for coming and chatting with us, talking some baseball for a little while. Much appreciated. But I want to talk about that a little bit more and just some of the things that I think about this. First of all, the baseball's running out of time. This has to happen fast. You know what I'm saying? Like, it has to happen really fast. I saw something on Twitter yesterday that even if it starts in mid-July, they have 60 games in 66 days for it to meet the schedule that the Major League Baseball said that they wanted, that the regular season doesn't go into October, and the playoffs at least aren't scheduled. Of course you have your Mr. November, and so it can happen, but to not have it scheduled into November. So clock's ticking, even if they come to a decision pretty soon in the next week. You have to get the ball rolling fast. They don't have the luxury of a month and a half, 2 months like basketball did. And here's the other thing. I'm not sure, and Chris just touched on it, that there doesn't seem, of course I'm sure they're working on it behind the scenes, but they're going to have pushback from players like the NBA did about safety, about wanting it to be as safe as possible. And for a long time it was talking about regional play between teams so that the travel is not as much as it absolutely has to be. But as cases start to rise again, you're seeing them reopen the discussion about the bubble, and that takes logistics. It takes a long time to figure out where they're going to go, and it's not just is it 3 or 4 different bubbles? Is it one bubble? How many teams are in each bubble? Where are you going to play these games? Because you would think Arizona, Florida, places like that, what are the epicenters of cases in this country right now? Florida, Texas, and Arizona. And here's the thing that really frustrates me the most is you would think that any sports league, and specifically baseball, who coins themselves as America's pastime, you'd think they'd be able to get together and make this happen for America, for nobody else. I mean, that sounds incredibly cliche, but it's true. Do you know how many fans that they had lost they might get back if they marketed themselves? They really leaned into that America's pastime during these tough times in America, during these tough times in the world. Like they would instantly become more popular if they would just be able to set their sides apart, set their differences apart for a little while and make this happen. Because baseball doesn't need to miss a season. No league needs to miss a season. Let's get that clear right now. No league needs to miss a season. But baseball really doesn't need to miss a season. And this is, I'm assuming that NBA ratings will be up, whether that's real or not. I'm assuming that NBA ratings will be up just because people aren't going to the games and people need something to do. The same could be said for Major League Baseball. And you lean into the fact that you're America's pastime and that we'll get through this together. And, maybe you can't come have a hot dog at Wrigley Field, but, you turn on the grill, whip up a couple hot dogs and eat some hot dogs while watching the game on TV. I think baseball really missed an opportunity to gain some popularity back, and even if the season actually does happen at this point, it's going to be really short. It's going to be behind, and that's the other thing. I mean, if they had gotten started a month ago, what other sport is there to watch? The answer is no sport. Maybe golf, and for those of you who know me, I love golf. Huge golfer. Love watching golf on TV. I know. And I think there's an argument for golf being a very spectator-friendly sport on TV. But most people don't think that. And apart from golf, there was nothing else to watch on TV for the last month and a half. Baseball could have easily slid in there. Now, I know there's, probably wouldn't have happened a month and a half ago, but even if they started on June 1, it would have been only baseball to watch. And so the ratings go through the roof. You're America's pastime. All of these other leagues, they're getting started at some point, but baseball's here. Baseball's America's pastime, and baseball is here for you in these tough times. I think they missed the boat on that, and it's unfortunate that it came at the expense of. It's unfortunate that it's because of that lack of trust between the players and the owners, like Chris said, because even if they start in mid-July, so you have a week and a half before basketball comes back, And so now not only are you competing with college football and NFL in the latter part of your season, you're competing with the NBA too. And there's very clearly a hierarchy when it comes to sports in this country, and right now baseball is nowhere near football and basketball. And so who's going to watch? I mean, there's, the people who watch baseball in the summer because there's nothing else to watch. The sweet spot for Major League Baseball is after the finals and before football starts. That, 2 months, month and a half if the finals go deep, where it's only baseball. You've got your All-Star break, you've got that to promote, and then you've got the beginning of the second half of the season that's all there is to watch, and they've missed that boat. And I think, we'll talk about this some at a different point, probably on Wednesday, but this might be the greatest thing that's ever happened from a scheduling perspective for the NBA, because the NBA might do really, really well here late in the summer, and then they're forced to start in mid-December. I think, if things happen the way that they're supposed to, I think we might be heading for a Christmas Day kickoff to the NBA season. I know right now the tentative plan is December 1st, but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the players are going to let that happen. But if the ratings are great now for the return of the season, and then they start on December 25th, there's nothing stopping the NBA from just starting the season on December 25th, and then you just play your season, and you play your season through the end of July. So your finals happen in mid-July. I mean, so then you're just competing with baseball, and then your season is, so you miss football as much as you possibly can. You basically completely miss college football because the national championship will be a couple weeks into January, and then college football's gone. You get your Christmas Day anyways, which is the NBA day of the year. And then you don't compete with football again because you're done right before football starts. And who that really hurts ultimately is baseball, because then baseball doesn't get it gets, August, the first half of August, while people aren't getting super excited about football yet. You get the first half of August, and that's it. And that could really suck. So I think, baseball has really missed the opportunity to gain some popularity back, and hopefully they can get it together and actually play a season so that at least something is salvaged of it, and we get some action on the diamond here in 2020. We're going to take a quick break and then come back with FYI to finish out the show. You're watching the Jmull Show on 110sportsmedia.com. All right, we're back on the Jmull Show. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a lot of fun. I'm really excited to get this show started as we start at 110sportsmedia.com. If you haven't checked out the stories we've got over there yet, we've got some stories over there at 110sportsmedia.com as this launch gets underway and this thing that we're sort of starting and giving a go. So you see the space on the right side of the screen at the last segment of every show. That the chat box is going to be there. So if you want to ask a question, want to chat about something we've been talking about, please fire away, and I'll pay attention to that as we wrap up the show every single day. But the last part of every show here on the Jmull Show is for your information, or we'll call it FYI, and it's essentially a couple things I want you to know before we get out of here. A couple of things, whether it's happening in the sports world, whether it's happening somewhere else. Maybe it's a movie I watched that is incredible that I think you need to watch. Today it just so happens to be mostly sports stuff and mostly things surrounding 110 Sports Media. But starting right now, the first installment for your information. So, FYI, 110sportsmedia.com launched today. If you're watching at 110sportsmedia.com/live or on Twitch at twitch.tv/the Jmull Show, 110 Sports Media is live today. On this particular day, we have Major League Baseball, NFL, and college basketball stories, as well as Josh Doring's 5 things from the week. NBA is coming on Wednesday, but when there's only 3 of us, you got to space out the content, and that didn't make the list today. But that so head over there if you haven't checked out the website yet. It would be very much appreciated. Number 2, FYI, number 2, Cade Cunningham on Twitter today pledged allegiance to Oklahoma State despite the Cowboys getting a 2020-2021 postseason ban. If you don't know who Cade Cunningham is, one of the premier prospects in the class of 2020 in college basketball, and he committed to Oklahoma State. Mike Boynton and his staff had been creating a relationship with him over the last several years. Cade's brother is actually on staff over at Oklahoma State. And then they get hit with, Oklahoma State had Lamont Evans was an assistant coach with Oklahoma State who ignored the guidelines of the NCAA when taking bribes to get recruits to Oklahoma State. And while that coaching staff has nothing to do with Oklahoma State anymore, Oklahoma State, the way that it is now, gets the brunt of the punishment for those shortcomings and for that cheating that happened. Oklahoma State, a part of the big FBI scandal that sort of uncovered a lot of things in college basketball. And so I think the assumption from a lot of people was, including me, I thought that he would either decommit or go somewhere else or join the G League. He was part of the players that were offered a spot in the G League program, or go play professional basketball overseas. He didn't do that. He re-upped with Oklahoma State, so to speak, and so props. I can do nothing but applaud that. I'm all for allegiance and loyalty, especially nowadays. So you'll never see any grief from me to a player who decides to do that. But it was surprising for me, and I think for a lot of people. Like I said, FYI, 4 news stories up on the site. We get underway with 110 Sports Media. NFL Draft, regrading MLB All Decade, and the first installment are our 100 greatest college basketball players of the decade. We'll have a guest on Friday, I believe, to talk about the first 30 players on that list as the first 3 stories come out over this week. And then finally, tomorrow, right here, 110sportsmedia.com/live, Touchline Talk with Josh Doring. Chris Brown is one of the other founders of 110 Sports, along with myself. Josh Doring is the other one. Touchline Talk, it's a soccer show. Nobody knows soccer. I don't know anybody who knows soccer like Josh does. He's turned it into a show. Touchline Talk with Josh Doring. Same spot, 11 a.m. Eastern to 12 p.m. Eastern on 110sportsmedia.com/live. I believe that's a wrap on the first ever Jmull Show. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day. Thank you so much for going to 110sportsmedia.com. And I will see you on Wednesday, same time. Stay safe out there. It's a crazy world, and we'll see you again on Wednesday.